An Unsocial Socialist, one of the selected work of George-Bernad-Shaw. Chapter 1. In the dusk of an October evening, a sensible-looking woman of 40 came out through an oaken door to a broad landing on the first floor of an old English country house. A braid of her hair had fallen forward, as if she had been stooping over book or pen, and she stood for a moment to smooth it and to gaze contemplatively, not in the least sentimentally. Through the tall, narrow window, the sun was setting, but its glories were at the other side of the house, for this window looked eastward, where the landscape of sheep walks and pasture land was sobering at the approach of darkness. The lady, like one whom silence and quiet were luxuries, lingered on the landing for some time. Then she turned towards another door, on which was inscribed in white letters, "Classroom number 6, arrested by a whispering above." She paused in the doorway and looked up the stairs along a broad, smooth handrail that swept around an unbroken curve at each landing, forming an inclined plane from the top of the bottom of the house. A young voice, apparently mimicking someone, now came from above, saying, "We will take the adults de la velocit next, if you please, ladies." Immediately a girl in a Holland dress shot down through space, whirled round the curve with a fearless centrifugal toss of her ankle, and vanished into the darkness beneath. She was followed by a stately girl in green, instantly holding her breath as she flew, and also by a large young woman in black, with her lower lips grasped between her teeth and her fine rose eyes protruding with excitement. Her passage created a miniature tempest which disarranged anew the hair of the lady on the landing, who waited in breathless alarm until two light shocks and a thump announced that the aerial voyagers had landed safely in the hall. "Oh, lo!" exclaimed the voice that had spoken before. "Here, Susan, it is a mercy your neck ain't broken," replied some palpitating female. "I will tell of you this time, Miss Whaley. Indeed, I will. And you too, Miss Carpenter. I wonder at you not to have more sense at your age and with your size. Miss Wilson can't help hearing. When you came down with a thump like that, you shake the whole house." "Oh, bother," said Miss Whaley. "The lady Abbess takes good care to shut out all the noise we make, let us." "Girls," said the lady above, calling down quietly, but with ominous distinctness. Silence and utter confusion ensued. Then came a reply in a tone of honeyed sweetness from Miss Whaley. "Did you call us, dear Miss Wilson?" "Yes, came here, if you please, all three." There was some hesitation among them, each offering the other precedence. At last they went up slowly, in the order, though not at all in the manner, of their flying descent, followed Miss Wilson into the classroom, and stood in a row before her, illuminated through 3 western windows with a glow of ruby orange light. Miss Carpenter, the largest of the 3, was red and confused. Her arms hung by her sides, her fingers twisting the folds of her dress. Miss Gertrude Lindsay, in pale sea green, had a small head, delicate complexion, and pearly teeth. She stood erect with an expression of cold distaste for reproof of any sort. The holland dress of the third offender had changed from yellow to white as she passed from the grey eastern twilight on the staircase into the warm western glow in the room. Her face had a bright olive tone and seemed to have a golden mica in its composition. Her eyes and hair were hazelnut color, and her teeth, the upper row of which she displayed freely, were like fine Portland stone and sloped outward enough to have spoilt her mouth had they not been supported by a rich upper lip and a finely curved impudent chin. Her half cajoling, half mocking air and her ready smile were difficult to confront with severity, and Miss Wilson knew it, for she would not look at her even when attracted by a convulsive start and an angry side glance from Miss Lindsay, who had just been indented between the ribs by a fingertip. "You are aware that you have broken the rules," said Miss Wilson quietly. "We didn't intend to. We really did not," said the girl in Holland coaxingly. "Pray, what was your intention then, Miss Whaley?" Miss Whaley unexpectedly treated this as a smart repartee instead of a rebuke. She sent up a strange little scream, which exploded in a cascade of laughter. "Pray be silent, Agatha," said Miss Wilson severely. Agatha looked contrite. Miss Wilson turned hastily to the eldest of the three and continued, "I am especially surprised at you, Miss Carpenter, since you have no desire to keep faith with me by upholding the rules, of which you are quite old enough to understand the necessity. I shall not trouble you with reproaches or appeals to which I am not convinced that you would not respond." Here Miss Carpenter, with an inarticulate protest, burst into tears. "But you should at least think of the danger into which your juniors are led by your childishness. How should you feel if Agatha had broken her neck?" "Oh," exclaimed Agatha, putting her hand quickly on her neck, "I didn't think there was any danger," said Miss Carpenter, struggling with her tears. Agatha had done it so oft. "Oh dear, you have torn me." Miss Bailey had pulled at her schoolfellow's skirt and pulled too hard. "Miss Bailey," said Miss Wilson, flushing slightly, "I must ask you to leave the room." "Oh no," exclaimed Agatha, clasping her hands in distress. "Please don't, dear Miss Wilson. I am so sorry. I beg your pardon. Since you will not do what I ask, I must go myself," said Miss Wilson sternly. "Come with me to my study," she added to the two other girls. "If you attempt to follow Miss Whaley, I shall regard it as an intrusion. But I will go away if you wish it. I didn't mean to disown. I shall not trouble you now. Come, girls." The three went out, and Miss Whaley, left behind in disgrace, made a surpassing grimace at Miss Lindsay, who glanced back at her. When she was alone, Her vivacity subsided. She went slowly to the window and gazed despairingly at the landscape. Once, when a sound of voices above reached her, her eyes brightened and her ready lip moved. But the next silent moment, she relapsed into moody indifference, which was not relieved until her two companions, looking very serious, re-entered. Well, she said gaily, has moral force been applied? Are you going to recording angel? Hush, Agatha, said Miss Carpenter. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. No, but you ought. You goose, a nice row you have got me into. It was your own fault. You tore my dress. Yes, when you were blurting out that I sometimes slide down the banisters. Oh, said Miss Carpenter slowly, as if this reason had not occurred to her before. Was that why you pulled me? Dear me, it has actually dawned upon you. You are a most awful, silly girl, Jane. What did the lady abbess say? Miss Carpenter again gave her tears way and could not reply. She is disgusted with us. And no wonder, said Miss Lindsay. She said it was all your fault, sobbed Miss Carpenter. Well, never mind, dear, said Agatha soothingly. Put it in the recording angel. I won't write a word in the recording angel unless you do so first, said Miss Lindsay angrily. You are more in fault than we are. Certainly, my dear, replied Agatha. A whole page, if you wish. Believe you, like writing in the recording angel, said Miss Carpenter spitefully. Yes, Jane. It is the best fun the place affords. It may be fun to you, said Miss Lindsay sharply, but it is not very creditable to me, as Miss Wilson said just now, to take a prize in moral science and when have to write down that I don't know how to behave myself. Besides, I don't know like to be told that I am ill-bred. Agatha laughed. What a deep old thing she is. She knows all our weaknesses and stabs at us through them. Catch her telling me or Jane there that we are ill-bred. I don't understand you, said Miss Lindsay hoarsely. Of course not. That is because you don't know as much moral science as I, though I never took a prize in it. You never took a prize in anything, said Miss Carpenter, and I hope I never shall, said Agatha. I would as soon as scramble for hot pennies in the snow, like the sweet street boys, as scramble to see who she answer most questions. Dr. Watts is enough moral science for me. Now for the recording angel. She went to the shelf and took down a heavy quarto bound in the black leather and inscribed in red letters, "My faults." This she threw reverently on the desk and tossed its pages over until she came to one only partly covered with manuscript confessions. For a wonder, she said, here are 2 entries that are not mine. Sarah Garam. What has she been confessing? Don't read it, said Miss Lindsay quickly. You know that it is the most dishonorable thing any of us can do. Poch, our little sins are not worth making such a fuss about. I always like to have any entries read. It makes me feel like an author. And so in Christian duty, I always read other people's. Listen to poor Sarah's tale of guilt. 1st October. I am very sorry that I slapped Miss Chambers in the lavatory this morning and knocked out one of her teeth. This was very wicked, but it was coming out by itself, and she has forgiven me because a new one will come in its place, and she was only pretending when she said she swallowed it. Sarah Garam. Little fool, said Miss Lindsay. The idea of our having to record in the same book with brats like that. Here is a touching revelation. 4th October. Helen Plantagenet is deeply grieved to have to confess that I took the first place in algebra yesterday unfairly. Miss Lindsay prompted me and, oh, exclaimed Miss Lindsay, reddening. That is how she thanks me for prompting her, is it? How dare she confess my faults in the recording angel? Serves you right for prompting her, said Miss Carpenter. She was always a double-faced cat, and you ought to have known better. Oh, I assure you it was not for her sake that I did it, replied Miss Lindsay. It was to prevent that Jackson girl from getting first place. I don't like Helen Plantagenet, but at least she is a lady. Stuff, Gertrude, said Agatha with a touch of earnestness. One would think, to hear you talk, that your grandmother was a cook. Don't be such a snob, Miss Whaley, said Gertrude, becoming scarlet. You are very. Oh, stop, oh, I will tell Miss. Oh, Agatha had inserted a steely finger between her ribs and was tickling her unendurably. Shh, whispered Miss Carpenter anxiously. The door is open. I am Miss Whaley, demanded Agatha, relentlessly, continuing to torture. Am I very? Whatever you were going to say. Am I? I am. No, gasped Gertrude, shrinking into a chair, almost in hysterics. You are very unlike Agatha. You have hurt me. You deserve it. If you ever get sulky with me again or call me Miss Whaley, I will kill you. I will tickle the soles of your feet with a feather. Miss Lindsay shuddered and hid her feet beneath the chair until your hair turns white. And now, if you are truly repentant, come and record. You must record first. It was all your fault. But I am the youngest, said Agatha. Well then, said Gertrude, afraid to press the point, but determined not to record first. Let Janie Carpenter begin. She is the eldest. Oh, of course, said Jane with a whimpering irony. Let Jane do all the nasty things first. I think it is very hard. You fancy that Janie is fool, but she isn't. You are recently not such a fool as you look, Jane, said Agatha gravely. But I will record first, if you like. No, you shan't, cried Jane, snatching the pen from her. I am the eldest, and I won't be put out of my place. She dipped the pen in the ink resolutely and prepared to write, then paused, considered, looked bewildered, and at last appealed piteously to Agatha. What shall I write? She said. You know how to write things down, and I don't. First put the date, said Agatha. To be sure, said Jane, writing it quickly. I forget that. Well, no, right. I am very sorry that Miss Wilson saw me when I slid down the banisters with evening Jane Carpenter. Is that all? That is all, unless you wish to add something of your own composition. I hope it is all right, said Jane, looking suspiciously at Agatha. However, there can't be any harm in it, for it is the simplest truth. Anyhow, if you are playing one of your jokes on me, you are a nasty mean thing, and I don't care. Now, Gertrude, it is your turn. Please look at mine and see whether the spelling is right. It is not my business to teach you to spell, said Gertrude, taking the pen, and while Jenny was murmuring at her churlishness, she wrote in the bold hand, I have broken the rules by sliding down the banisters today with Miss Carpenter and Miss Whaley. Miss Whaley went first. You wretch, exclaimed Agatha, reading over her shoulder, and your father is an admiral. I think it is only fair, said Miss Lindsay, gaily, but assuming the tone of a moralist. It is perfectly true. All my money was made in trade, said Agatha, but I should be ashamed to save myself by shifting blame to your aristocratic shoulders. You pitiful thing. Here, give me the pen. I will strike it out if you wish, but I think, no, it shall stay there to witness against you. How I confess my fault. And she wrote in a fine, rapid hand. This evening, Gertrude, Lindsay and Jane Carpenter met me at the top of the stairs and said they want to slide down the banisters and would do it if I went first. I told them that it was against the rules, but they said that did not matter. And as they are older than I am, I allowed myself to be persuaded and did. What do you think of that? Said Agatha, displaying the page. And read it, and protested clamorously. It is perfectly true, said Agatha solemnly. It is beastly mean, said Jane energetically. The idea of your finding fault with Gertrude and then going and being twice as bad yourself. I never heard of such a thing in my life. Thus, bad begins, but words remain behind, as the standard elocutionist says, said Agatha, adding another sentence to her confession. But it was all my fault. Also, I was rude to Miss Wilson and refused to leave the room when she bade me. I was not wilfully wrong, except in the sliding down the banisters. I am so fond of a slide that I could not resist the temptation. Be warned by me, Agatha, said Jane impressively. If you write cheeky things in that book, you will be expelled. Indeed, replied Agatha significantly. Wait until Miss Wilson. See what you have written. Gertrude, cried Jane with a sudden misgiving. Has she made me write anything improper? Agatha, do tell me if. Here a gong sounded, and the three girls simultaneously exclaimed, "Grab!" and rushed from the room. Chapter 2. One sunny afternoon, a hansom drove at great speed along Belsize Avenue, St. John's Wood, and stopped before a large mansion. A young lady sprang out, ran up the steps, and rang the bell impatiently. She was of the olive complexion, with a sharp profile, dark eyes with long lashes, narrow mouth with delicately serious lips, small head, feet and hand, with long taper fingers, lithe and very slender figure, moving with serpent-like grace. Oriental taste was displayed in the colors of her costume, which consisted of a white dress, close-fitting, and printed with an elaborate china blue pattern, a yellow straw hat covered with artificial hawthorn and scarlet berries, and tan-colored gloves reaching beyond the elbow, and decorated with a profusion of gold bangles. The door not being opened immediately, she rang again violently, and was presently admitted by a maid, who seemed surprised to see her. Without making any enquiry, she darted upstairs into the drawing room, where a matron of good presence, with features of the finest Jewish type, sat reading. With her was a handsome boy in black velvet, who said, "Mamma, here is Henrietta." "Arthur," said the young lady excitedly, "leave the room this instant, and don't dare to come back until you get leave." The boy's countenance fell, and he sulkily went out without a word. "Is anything wrong?" said the matron, putting away her book with the unconcerned resignation of an experienced person who foresees a storm in the teacup. "Where is Sydney?" "Gone, gone. Deserted me." The young lady's utterance failed, and she threw herself upon an ottoman, sobbing with passionate spite. "Nonsense. I thought Sydney had more sense. Here, Henrietta, don't be silly. I suppose you have quarrelled." "No, no, no," cried Henrietta, stamping on the carpet. "We had not a word. I have not lost my temper since we were married. Mamma, I solemnly swear I have not. I will kill myself. There is no other way. There is a curse on me. I am marked out to be miserable." He. "Tut, tut. What has happened, Henrietta? As you have been married now nearly 6 weeks, you can hardly be surprised at a little tiff arising. You are so excitable. You can't expect the sky to be always cloudless. Most likely you are to blame, for Sydney is far more reasonable than you. Stop crying and behave like a woman of sense, and I will go to Sydney and make everything right." "But he is gone, and I cannot find out where. Oh, what shall I do? What has happened?" Henrietta writhed with impatience. Then, forcing herself to tell her story, she answered, "We arranged on Monday that I should spend 2 days with Aunt Judith instead of going with him to Birmingham. That horrid trade congress. We parted on the best of terms. He couldn't have been more affectionate. I will kill myself. I don't care about anything or anybody. And when I came back to Wednesday, he was gone, and there was this letter." She produced a letter and wept more bitterly than before. "Let me see it." Henrietta hesitated, but her mother took the letter from her, sat down near the window, and composed herself to read without the least regard to her daughter's vehement distress. The letters ran thus: "Monday night. My dearest, I am off. Surfeited with endearment to live my own life and do my own work. I could only have prepared you for this by coldness or neglect, which are wholly impossible to me. Then the spell of your presence is upon me. I find that I must fly if I am to serve myself. I am afraid that I cannot give you satisfactory and intelligible reasons for these steps. You are beautiful and luxurious creature. Life is to you full and complete only when it is a carnival of love. My case is just the reverse. Before 3 soft speeches have escaped me, I rebuke myself for folly and insincerity. Before a caress has had time to cool, a strenuous revulsion seizes me. I long to return to my old, lonely, ascetic hermit life. To my day dry book, my socialist propagandism, my voyage of discovery through the wilderness of thought. I married in an insane fit of belief that I had a share of the natural affection which carries other men through lifetime of matrimony. Already I am undeceived. You are to me the loveliest woman in the world. Well, for 5 weeks I have walked and tallied and dallied with the loveliest woman in the world, and the upshot is that I am flying from her and am for a hermit's cave until I die. Love cannot keep possession of me. All my strongest powers rise up against it and will not enter it. Forgive me for writing nonsense that you won't understand, and do not think too hardly of me. I have been as good to you as my selfish nature allowed. Do not seek to disturb me in the obscurity which I desire and deserve. My solicitor will call on your father to arrange business matters, and you shall be as happy as wealth and liberty can make you. We shall meet again someday. Adieu, my last love. Sydney Trefusis. Well, cried Mrs. Trefusis, observing through her tears that her mother had read the letter and was contemplating it in a daisy. Well, certainly, said Mrs. Jansenius with emphasis. Do you think he is quite sense, Henrietta, or have you been plaguing him for too much attention? Men are not willing to give us their whole existence to their wives, even during the honeymoon. He pretended that he was never happy out of my presence, sobbed Henrietta. There never was anything so cruel. I often wanted to be by myself for a change, but I was afraid to hurt his feelings by saying so. Yet now he has no feelings, but he must come back to me. Mustn't he, Mamma? He ought to. I suppose he has not gone away with anyone. Henrietta sprang up, her cheeks vivid scarlet. If I thought that I would pursue him to the end of the earth and murder her, but no, he is not like anybody else. He hates me. Everybody hates me. You don't care whether I am deserted or not, nor Papa, nor anyone in this house. Mrs. Jansenius, still indifferent to her daughter's agitation, considered a moment and then said placidly, You can do anything until we hear from the solicitor. In the meantime, you may stay with us if you wish. I did not expect a visit from you so soon, but your room has not been used since you went away." Mrs. Trefesus ceased crying, chilled by this first intimation that her father's house was no longer her home. A real sense of desolation came upon her. Under its cold influence, she began to collect herself and to feel her pride rising like a barrier between her and her mother. "I won't stay long," she said, "if his solicitor will not tell me where he is. I will hunt through English for him. I am sorry to trouble you." "Oh, you will be no greater trouble than you have always been," said Mrs. Jansius calmly, not displeased to see that her daughter had taken the hint. "You had better go and wash your face. People may call and presume you don't wish to receive them in that plight. If you meet Arthur on the stairs, please tell him he may come in." Henrietta screwed her lips into the curious pout and withdrew. Arthur then came in and stood at the window in sullen silence, brooding over his recent expulsion. Suddenly he exclaimed, "Here is Papa, and it is not 5 o'clock yet." Whereupon his mother sent him away again. Mr. Jansinus was a man of imposing presence, not yet in his 15th year, but not far from it. He moved with dignity, bearing himself as if the contest of his massive brow were precious. His handsome aquiline nose and keen dark eyes proclaimed his Jewish origin, of which he was ashamed. Those who did not know this naturally believed that he was proud of it, and were at a loss to account for his permitting his children to be educated as Christians, well instructed in business, and subject to no emotion outside the law of family, respectably, comfort and money. He had maintained the capital inherited from his father, and made it breed new capital in the usual way. He was a banker, and his object as such was to intercept and appropriate the immense saving which the bank system effects, and so, as far as possible, to leave the rest of the world working just as hard as before banking was introduced. But as he would world not on these terms have banked at all, he had to give them some of the saving as an inducement, as they profited by the saving as well as he, and he had the satisfaction of being at once a wealthy citizen and a public benefactor, rich in comforts and easy to conscience. He entered the room quickly, and his wife saw that something had vexed him. "Do you know what has happened, Ruth?" he said. "Yes, she is upstairs." Mr. Jansius stared. "Do you mean to say that she has left already?" he said. "What business has she to come here? It is natural enough. Where else should she have gone?" Mr. Jansius, who mistrusted his own judgment when it differed from that of his wife, replied slowly, "Why did she not go to her mother?" Mrs. Jansius, puzzled in her turn, looked at him with cool wonder and remarked, "I am her mother, am I not?" "I was not aware of it. I am surprised to hear it, Ruth. Have you had a letter too?" "I have seen the letter, but what do you mean by telling me that you do not No, I am Henrietta's mother. Are you trying to be funny? Henrietta, is she here? Is this some fresh trouble? I don't know. What are you talking about? I am talking about Agatha Whaley. Oh, I was talking about Henrietta. Well, what about Henrietta? What about Agatha Whaley? At this, Mr. Jansius became exasperated, and he deemed it best to relate what Henrietta had told her. When she gave him Trefusis' letter, he said more calmly, "Misfortunes never come singly. Read that," and handed her another letter, so that they both began reading at the same time. Mrs. Jansius read the following: Alton College, Levern. To Mrs. Whaley, Acacia Lodge, Chiswick. Dear Madam, I write with great regret to request that you will at once withdraw Miss Whaley from Alton College. In an establishment like this, where restraint upon the liberty of the students is reduced to a minimum, it is necessary that the small degree of subordination which is absolutely indispensable be acquiesced in all without complaint or delay. Miss Whaley has failed to comply with this condition. She has declared her wish to leave and has assumed an attitude towards myself and my colleague which we cannot, consistently with our duty to ourselves and her fellow students, pass over. If Miss Whaley has any cause to complain of her treatment here or of the step which she has compelled us to take, she will doubtless make it known to you. Perhaps you will be so good as to communicate with Miss Whaley's guardian, Mr. Jansius, with whom I shall be happy to make an equitable arrangement respecting the fees which have been paid in advance for the current term. I am, dear Madam, yours faithfully, Maria Wilson. A nice young lady that, said Mrs. Jansius. I do not understand this, said Mr. Jansius, reddening as he took in the purport of his son-in-law's letter. I will not submit it. What does it mean, Ruth? I don't know. Sidney is mad, I think, and his honeymoon has brought his madness out. But you must not let him throw Henrietta on my hands again. Mad. Does he think he can string his responsibility to his wife because she is my daughter? Does he think because his mother's father was a baronet that he can put Henrietta aside the moment her society falls on him? Oh, it is nothing of that sort. He never thought of us, but I will make him think of us, said Mr. Jansius, raising his voice in great agitation. He shall answer for it. Just then Henrietta returned and saw her father moving excitedly and to and fro, repeating, "He shall answer to me for this. He shall answer for it." Mrs. Jansius frowned at her daughter to remain silent and said soothingly, "Don't lose your temper, John." "But I will lose my temper. Insolent, horned, damned scoundrel." "He is not," whimpered Henrietta, sitting down and taking out her handkerchief. "Oh, come, come," said Mrs. Jansius peremptorily. "We have had enough crying. Let us have no more of it." Henrietta sprang up in a passion. "I will say and do as I please," she exclaimed. "I am a married woman, and I will receive no orders, and I will have any husband back again, no matter what he does to hide himself. Papa, won't you make him come back to me? I am dying. Promise that you will make him come back." And throwing herself upon her father's bosom, she postponed further discussion by going into hysterics and startling the household by her screams. Chapter 3. One of the professors at Alton College was Mrs. Miller, an old-fashioned schoolmistress who did not believe in Miss Wilson's system of government by moral force, and carried it out under protest. Though not ill-natured, she was narrow-minded enough to be in some degree contemptible, and was consequently prone to suspect others of despising her. She suspected Agatha in particular, and treated her with disdainful curtness in such intercourse as they had. It was fortunately little. Agatha was not hurt by this, for Mrs. Miller was an unsympathetic woman who made no friends among the girls, and satisfied her affectionate impulses by petting a large cat named Gracchus, but generally called Bacchus, by an enduring modification of the harsh initial consonant. One evening, Mrs. Miller, seated with Miss Wilson in the study, correcting examination papers, heard in the distance a cry like that of a cat in distress. She ran to the door and listened. Presently there arose a prolonged wail, splurring up through 2 octaves and subsiding again. It was a true feline screech, impossible to localize, but it was interrupted by a sob, a snarl, a fierce spitting, and a scuffling, coming unmistakably from a room on the floor beneath, in which at that hour the older girls assembled for study. "My poor Gracchi!" exclaimed Mrs. Miller, running downstairs as fast as she could. She found the room unusually quiet. Every girl was deep in study except Miss Carpenter, who, pretending to pick up a fallen book, was purple with suppressed laughter and the congestion caused by stooping. "Where is Miss Ward?" demanded Mrs. Miller. "Miss Ward has gone for some astronomical diagrams in which we are interested," said Agatha, looking up gravely. Just then Miss Ward, diagram in hand, entered. "Has that cat been in here?" she said, not seeing Mrs. Miller, and speaking in a tone expressive of antipathy to Gracchus. Agatha started and drew up her ankles, as if fearful of having them bitten. Then, looking apprehensively under the desk, she replied, "There is no cat here, Miss Ward." "There is one somewhere, I heard it," said Miss Ward carelessly, unrolling her diagrams, which she began to explain without further parley. Mrs. Miller, anxious for her pet, hastened to seek it elsewhere. In the hall, she met one of the housemaids. "Susan," she said, "have you seen Gracchus?" "He is asleep on the hearthrug in your room, ma'am, but I heard him crying down here a moment ago. I feel sure that another cat has got in, and that they are fighting." Susan smiled compassionately. Lord bless you, Mom, she said. That was Miss Whaley. It is a sort of play acting that she goes through. There is the bee on the window pane and the soldier up the chimney and the cat under the dresser. She does them all like life. The soldier in the chimney, repeated Mrs. Miller, shocked. Yes, Mom, like as it were a follower that had hid there when he heard the mistress coming. Mrs. Miller's face set determinedly. She returned to the study and related what had just occurred, adding some sarcastic comment on the efficacy of moral force in maintaining collegiate discipline. Miss Wilson looked grave, considered for some time, and at last said, I must think over this. Would you mind leaving it in my hands for the present? Mrs. Miller said that she did not care in whose hands in remaining, provided her own were washed of it, and resumed her work at the papers. Miss Wilson then, wishing to be alone, went into the empty classroom at the other side of the landing. She took the fault book from its shelf and sat down before it. It is record closed with the announcement in Agatha's handwriting. Miss Wilson has called me impertinent and has written to my uncle that I have refused to obey the rules. I was not impertinent and I never refused to obey the rules. So much for moral force. Miss Wilson rose vigorously, exclaiming, I will soon let her know whether. She checked herself and looked around hastily, superstitiously, fancying that Agatha might have stolen into the room unobserved. Reassured that she was alone, she examined her conscience as to whether she had done wrong in calling Agatha impertinent, justifying herself by the reflection that Agatha had, in fact, been impertinent. Yet she recollected that she had refused to admit this plea on a recent occasion when Jane Carpenter had advanced it in extenuation of having called the fellow student a liar. Had she then been unjust to Jane or inconsiderate to Agatha? Her casuistry was interrupted by someone softly whistling a theme from the overture of Masaniello, popular at the college in the form of an arrangement for 6 piano fortes and 12 hands. There was only one student, unladylike and musical enough to whistle, and Miss Wilson was ashamed to find herself growing nervous at the prospect of an encounter with Agatha, who ended whistling sweetly, but with a lugubrious countenance. When she saw in those present she stood. She begged pardon politely and was about to withdraw, when Miss Wilson, summoning all her judgment and tact, and hoping that they would, contrary to their custom in emergencies, respond to the summons, said, Agatha, come here, I want to speak to you. Agatha closed her lips, drew in a long breath through her nostrils, and marched to within a few feet of Miss Wilson, where she halted with her hand clasped before her. Sit down. Agatha sit down with a single movement, like a doll. I don't understand that, Agatha, said Miss Wilson, pointing to the entry in the recording angel. What does it mean? I am unfairly treated, said Agatha with a sign of agitation. In what way? In every way. I am expected to be something more than mortal. Everyone else is encouraged to complain and to be weak and silly, but I must have no feeling. I must be always in the right. Everyone else may be homesick or huffed or in low spirits. I must have no nerves and must keep others laughing all day long. Everyone else may sulk when a word of reproach is addressed to them and may make the professors afraid to find fault with them. I have to bear with the insult of teachers who have less self-control than I, a girl of 17, and must coax them out of the difficulties they make for themselves by their own ill temper. But Agatha, oh, I know I am talking nonsense, Miss Wilson. But can you expect me to be always sensible, to be infallible? Yes, Agatha, I do not think it is too much to expect you to be always sensible, and then you have neither sense nor sympathy yourself, said Agatha. There was an awful pause. Neither could have told how long it lasted. Then Agatha, feeling that she must do or say something desperate or else fly, made a distracted gesture and ran out of the room. She rejoined her companions in the great hall of the mansion, where they were assembled after study for recreation, a noisy process which always set in spontaneously when the professors withdraw. She usually sat with her two favorite associates on a high window seat near the hearth. That place was now occupied by a little girl with flaxen hair, whom Agatha, regardless of moral force, lifted by the shoulders and deposited on the floor. Then she sat down and said, "Oh, such a piece of news." Miss Carpenter opened her eyes eagerly. Gertrude Lindsay affected indifference. "Someone is going to be expelled," said Agatha. "Expelled who?" "You will know soon enough, Jane," replied Agatha, suddenly grave. "It is someone who made an impudent entry in the recording angel." Fear stole upon Jane and she became very red. "Agatha," she said, "it was you who told me what to write. You know you did, and you can't deny it." "I can't deny it, can't I? I am ready to swear that I never dictated a word to you in my life." "Gertrude knows you did," exclaimed Jane, appalled and almost in tears. "There," said Agatha, petting her as if she were a vast baby. "It shall not be expelled, so it shan't. Have you seen the recording angel lately, either of you?" "Not since our last entry," said Gertrude. "Chips," said Agatha, calling to the flaxen-haired child, "go upstairs to number 6, and if Miss Wilson isn't there, fetch me the recording angel." The little girl grumbled inarticulately and did not stir. "Chips," resumed Agatha, "did you ever wish that you had never been born?" "Why don't you go yourself?" said the child pettishly, but evidently alarmed. "Because," continued Agatha, ignoring the question, "you shall with yourself dead and buried under the blackest flag in the cold cellar. If you don't bring me the book before I count 60, 1, 2, go at once and do as you are told, you disagreeable little thing," said Gertrude sharply. "How dare you be so disobliging?" 9, 10, 11, pursued Agatha. The child quailed, went out and presently returned, hugging the recording angel in her arms. "You are a good little darling. When your better qualities are brought out by a judicious application of moral force," said Agatha, good humoredly. "Remind me to save the raisins out of my pudding for you tomorrow. Now, Jane, you shall see the entry for which the best-hearted girl in the college is to be expelled. Viola. The two girls read and were awestruck, Jane opening her mouth and gasping, Gertrude closing hers and looking very serious. Do you mean to say that you had the dreadful cheek to let the Lady Abbess see that? Said Jane. Oh, she would have forgiven that. You should have heard what I said to her. She fainted 3 times. That is a story, said Gertrude gravely. I beg your pardon, said Agatha, swiftly grasping Gertrude's knee. Nothing, cried Gertrude, flinching hysterically. Don't, Agatha. How many times did Miss Wilson faint? 3 times. I will scream, Agatha. I will indeed. 3 times, as you say. And I wonder that a girl brought up as you have been by moral force should be capable of repeating such a falsehood. But we had an awful row, really and truly. She lost her temper. Fortunately, I never lost mine. Well, I am braved, exclaimed Jane incredulously. I like that. For a girl of county family, you are inexcusably vulgar, Jane. I don't know what I said, but she will never forgive me for profaning her pet book. I shall be expelled as certainly as I am sitting here. And do you mean to say that you are going away? Said Jane, faltering as she began to realize the consequences. I do, and what is to become of you when I am not here to get you out of your scrapes, or of Gertrude without me to check her inveterate snobbishness is more than I can foresee. I am not snobbish, said Gertrude, although I do not choose to make friends with everyone. But I never objected to you, Agatha. No, I should like to catch you at it. Hello, Jane, who had suddenly burst into tears. What is the matter? I trust you are not permitting yourself to take the liberty of crying for me. Indeed, sobbed Jane indignantly. I know that I am a fool for my pains. You have no hurt. You certainly are a fool, as you aptly express it, said Agatha, passing her arm round Jane and disregarding an angry attempt to shake it off. But if I had any hurt, it would be touched by this proof of your attachment. I never said you had no heart, protested Jane, but I hate when you speak like a book. You hate when I speak like a book, do you? My dear, silly old Jane, I shall miss you greatly. Yes, I dare say, said Jane with a tearful sarcasm. At least my snoring will never keep you awake again. You don't snore, Jane. I have been in a conspiracy to make you believe that you do. That is all. Isn't it good of me to tell you? Jane was overcome by this revelation. After a long pause, she said with a deep conviction, I always knew that I didn't. Oh, the way you kept it up. I solemnly declare that from this time forth I will believe nobody. Well, and what do you think of it all? Said Agatha, transferring her attention to Gertrude, who was very grave. I think I am now speaking seriously, Agatha. I think you are in the wrong. Why do you think that, pray? Demanded Agatha, a little roused. You must be, or Miss Wilson would not be angry with you. Of course, according to your own account, you are always in the right and everyone else is always wrong. But you shouldn't have written that in the book. You know, I speak as your friend. And pray, what does your wrecked little soul know? If my motive and feelings, it is easy enough to understand you, retorted Gertrude. Nettled self-conceit is not so uncommon that one need be at a loss to recognize it. And mind, Agatha Whaley said, continued, as if goaded by some unbearable reminiscence. If you are really going, I don't care whether we part friends or not. We have not forgotten the day when you called me a spiteful cat. I have repented, said Agatha, unmoved. One day I sat down and watched Bacchus seated on the hearthrug, with these moony eyes looking into space so thoughtfully and patiently that I apologized for comparing you to him. If I were to call him a spiteful cat, he would only not believe me, because he is a cat, said Jane, with a giggle, which was seldom far behind her tears. No, but because he is not spiteful. Gertrude keeps a recording angel inside her little head, and is so full of other people's faults, written in large hand and read through a magnifying glass, that there is no room to enter her own. You are very poetic, said Gertrude, but I understand what you mean, and shall not forget it. You ungrateful wreck, exclaimed Agatha, turning upon her so suddenly and imperiously that she involuntarily shrunk aside. How often, when you have tried to be insolent and false with me, I have not driven away your bad angel by tickling you. Had you a friend in the college except half a dozen toadies until I came? And now, because I have sometimes, for your own good, shown you your faults, you bear malice against me and say that you don't care whether we part friends or not. I didn't say so. Oh, Gertrude, you know you did, said Jane. You seem to think that I have no conscience, said Gertrude querulously. I wish you hadn't, said Agatha. Look at me. I have no conscience, and see how much pleasanter I am. You care for no one but yourself, said Gertrude. You never think that other people have feeling too. No one ever consider me. Oh, I like to hear you talk, cried Janie ironically. You are considered a great deal more than in good for you. And the more you are considered, the more you want to be considered. As if, declaimed Agatha theatrically. Increase of appetite did grow by what it feed on, Shakespeare. Bother Shakespeare, said Janie impetuously. Old fool that expect credit for saying things that everybody knows. But if you complain of not being considered, Gertrude, how would you like to be me, whom everybody sets down as a fool? But I am not such a fool as you look, interposed Agatha. I have told you so scores of times, Jane, and I am glad that you have adopted my opinion at last. Which would you rather be, a greater fool than a? Oh, shut up, said Janie impatiently. You have asked me that twice this week already. The three were silent for some second. After this, Agatha meditating, Gertrude moody, Jane vacant and restless. At last Agatha said, and are you too also smarting under a sense of the inconsiderateness and selfishness of the rest of the world, both misunderstood? everything expected from you and no allowances made for you. I don't know what you mean by both of us, said Gertrude coldly. Neither do I, said Jane angrily. That is just the way people treat me. You may laugh, Agatha, and she may turn up her nose as much as she like. You know it is true. But the idea of Gertrude wanting to make out that she isn't considered is nothing but sentimentality and vanity and nonsense. You are exceedingly rude, Miss Carpenter, said Gertrude. My manners are as good as yours, and perhaps better, retorted Jane. My family is a good anyhow. Children, children, said Agatha admonitorily. Do not forget that you are sworn friends. We didn't swear, said Jane. We were to have been 3 sworn friends, and Gertrude and I were willing, but you wouldn't swear, and so the bargain was cried off. Just so, said Agatha, and the result is that I spent all my time in keeping peace between you. And now, to go back to our subject, may I ask whether it has ever occurred to you that no one ever considered me? I suppose you think that very funny. You take good care to make yourself considered, sneered Jane. You cannot say that I do not consider you, said Gertrude reproachfully. Not when I tickle you, dear. I consider you and I am not ticklesome, said Jane tenderly. Indeed, let me try, said Agatha, slipping her arm about Jane's ample waist and eliciting a piercing combination of laugh and screaming from her. Shh, whispered Gertrude quickly. Don't you see the lady Abbas? Miss Wilson had just entered the room. Agatha, without appearing to be aware of her presence, stealthily withdrew her arm and said aloud, How can you make such a noise, Janie? You will disturb the whole house. Janie reddened with indignation but had to remain silent, for the eyes of the principal were upon her. Miss Wilson had her bonnet on. She announced that she was going to walk to Levern, the nearest village. Did any of the 6th from young ladies wish to accompany her? Agatha jumped from her seat at once, and Jane smoothed a laugh. Miss Wilson, said the 6th form. Miss Whaley, said Miss Ward, who had entered also. You are not in the 6th form. No, said Agatha sweetly, but I want to go, if I may. Miss Wilson looked around. The 6th form considered of for studious young ladies, whose goal in life for the present was an examination by one of the universities, or as a college phrase was, the Cambridge local. None of them responded. 5th form, then, said Miss Wilson. Janie, Gertrude, and 4 others rose and stood with Agatha. Very well, said Miss Wilson. Do not be long dressing. They left the room quietly and dashed at the staircase the moment they were out of sight. Agatha, though void of emulation for the Cambridge local, always competed with ardor for the honor of being first or downstairs. They soon returned, clad for walking, and left the college in procession, 2 by 2, Jane and Agatha leading, Gertrude and Miss Wilson coming last. The road to Levern lay through acres of pasture land, formerly arable, now abandoned to cattle, which made more money for the landlord, the men whom they had displaced. Miss Wilson's young ladies being instructed in economics, knew that this proved that the land was being used to produce what was most wanted from it, and if all the advantage went to the landlord, that was but natural, as he was the chief gentleman in the neighborhood. Still, the arrangement had its disagreeable side, for it involved a great many cows, which made them afraid to cross the fields, a great many tramps, who made them afraid to walk the road, and the scarcity of gentlemen, subjects for the maiden, art of fascination. The sky was cloudy. Agatha, reckless of dusty stockings, waded through the heap of fallen leaves with the delight of a child paddling in the sea. Gertrude picked her step carefully, and the rest tramped along, chatting subduedly, occasionally making some scientific or philosophical remark in the louder tone, in order that Miss Wilson might overhear and give them due credit. So a herdsman, who seemed to have caught something of the nature and expression of the beasts he tended. They met no one until they approached the village, where, on the brow of an acclivity, masculine humanity appeared in the shape of two curates, one tall, thin, close-shaven, with a book under his arm, and his neck craned forward, the other middle-sized, robust, upright, and aggressive, with short black whiskers, and an air of protest against such notion as that a clergyman may not marry, hunt, play cricket, or share the sports of honest laymen. The shaven one was Mr. Joseph, his companion Mr. Fairholme. Obvious scriptural perversion of this brace of names had been introduced by Agatha. Here come Pharaoh and Joseph, she said to Jane. Joseph will blush when you look at him. Pharaoh, don't blush until he passes Gertrude, as we shall lose that. Joseph indeed, said Jane scornfully. He loves you, Jane, thin person like a fine apple of a woman. Pharaoh, who is a cad, like blue blood on the same principle of the attraction of opposites. That is why he is captivated by Gertrude's aristocratic air. If he only knew how she despises him. He is too vain to suspect it. Besides, Gertrude despises everyone, even us, or rather she doesn't despise anyone in particular, but is contemptuous by nature. Just as you are stout, me, I had rather be stout than stuck up. Ought we to go? I will certainly. I want to make Pharaoh blush, if I can. The two persons had been simulating an interest in the cloudy firmament as an excuse for not looking at the girls until close at hand. Jane sent an eye flash at Joseph with a skill which proved her favorite assertion, that she was not so stupid as people thought. He flushed and took off his soft, low-crowned felt hat. Fairholme saluted very solemnly, for Agatha bowed to him with marked seriousness. But when his gravity and his stiff silk hat were at their highest point, the darted and mocking smile at him, and he too blushed, all the deeper because he was enraged with himself for doing so. Did you ever see such a pair of fools? Whispered Jane, giggling. They cannot help their sex. They say women are fools, and so they are, but thank heaven, they are not quite and bad as men. I should like to look back and see Pharaoh passing Gertrude, but if he saw me he would think I was admiring him, and he is conceited enough to already without that. The two curates became redder and redder as they passed the column of young ladies. Miss Lindsay would not look to their side of the road, and Miss Wilson's nod and smile were not quite sincere. She never spoke to curates, and kept up no more intercourse with the vicar than she could not avoid. He suspected her of being an infidel, though neither he nor the other mortal in Levern had ever heard a word from her on the subject of her religious opinions. But he knew that moral science was taught secularly at the college, and he felt that where morals were made a department of science, the demand or religion must follow proportionately. What a life to lead and what a place to live in, exclaimed Agatha. We meet two creatures more like suits of black men, and that is an incident, a startling incident in our existence. I think they are awful fun, said Jane, except that Joseph had such large ears. The girls now came to a place where the road dipped through a plantation of sombre sycamore and horse chestnut trees. As they passed down into it, a little wind sprang up. The fallen leaves stirred, and the branches heaved a long, rustling sigh. I hate this bit of road, said Jane, hurrying on. It is just the sort of place that people get robbed and murdered in. It is not such a bad place to shelter in if we get caught in the rain. As I expected, we shall before we get back, said Agatha, feeling the fitful breeze strike ominously on her cheek. A nice pickle I shall be in with these light shoes on. I wish I had put on my strong boots. If it rain, I will go into the old chalet. Miss Wilson won't let you. It is trespassing. What matter? Nobody lives in it, and the gate is off its hinges. I only want to stand under the veranda, not to break into the wrecked place. Besides, the landlord knows Miss Wilson. He won't mind. There is a drop. Miss Carpenter looked up and immediately received a heavy raindrop in her eyes. Oh, she cried, it is pouring. We shall be drenched. Agatha stopped, and the column broke into the group about her. Miss Wilson, she said, it is going to rain in torrents, and Jane and I have only our shoes on. Miss Wilson paused to consider the situation. Someone suggested that if they hurried on, they might reach Levern before the rain came down. More than a mile, said Agatha scornfully, and the rain coming down already. Someone else suggested a return to the college. More than 2 miles, said Agatha. We should be drowned. There is nothing for it but to wait here under the trees, said Miss Wilson. The branches are very bare, said Gertrude anxiously. If it should come down heavily, when will drip worse than the rain itself? Much worse, said Agatha. I think we had better get under the veranda of the old chalet. It is not half a minute's walk from here, but we have no right. Here the sky darkened threateningly. Miss Wilson checked herself and said, I suppose it is still empty. Of course, replied Agatha, impatient to be moving. It is almost a ruin. Then let us go there, by all means, said Miss Wilson, not disposed to stand in trifles at the risk of a bad cold. They hurried on, and came presently to a green hill by the wayside. On the slope was a dilapidated Swiss cottage surrounded by a veranda on slender wooden pillars, about which clung a few tendrils of withered creeper, there stray and still swinging from the recent wind, now momentarily hushed as if listening for the coming of the rain. Access from the roadway was by a rough wooden gate in the hedge, to the surprise of Agatha, who had last seen this gate off its hinges and only attached to the post by a rusty chain and padlock. It was now rehung and fastened by a new hasp, the weather admitting of no delay to consider these repairs. She opened the gate and hastened up the slope, followed by the troop of girls. Their ascent ended with a rush, for the rain suddenly came down in torrents. When they were safe under the veranda, panting, laughing, grumbling, or congratulating themselves on having been so close to be place of shelter, Miss Wilson observed with some uneasiness a spade, new, like the hasp of the gate, sticking upright in a patch of ground that someone had evidently been digging lately. She was about to comment on this sign of habitation when the door of the chalet was flung open and Jane screamed as a man darted out to the spade, which he was about to carry in out of the wet, when he perceived the company under the veranda and stood still in amazement. He was young laborer with a reddish-brown beard of weeks' growth. He wore corduroy trousers and a linen-sleeved corduroy vest, both like the hasp and spade new. A coarse blue shirt with a vulgar red and orange neckerchief, also new, completed his dress, and to shield himself from the rain, he held up a silk umbrella with a silver-mounted ebony handle, which he seemed unlikely to have come by honestly. Miss Wilson felt like a boy caught robbing an orchard, but she put a bold face on the matter and said, "Will you allow us to take shelter here until the rain is over?" "For certain, your ladyship," he replied, respectfully applying the spade handle in his hair, which was combed down to his eyebrows. "Your ladyship does me proud to take refuge from the inclemency of the allotment beneath my ample roof tree." His accent was barbarous, and he, like a low comedian, seemed to relish its vulgarity. As he spoke, he came and among them for shelter, and propped his spade against the wall of the chalet, kicking the soil from his hobnailed blucher boots, which were new. "I came out, honored lady," he resumed, much at his ease, "to house my spade, whereby I earn my living. That the pen is to the poet, such is the spade to the working man." He took the kerchief from his neck, wiped his temples as if the sweat of honest toil were there, and calmly tied it on again. "If you will cause a remark from common men," he observed, "your ladyship has a fine family of daughters." "They are not my daughters," said Miss Wilson rather shortly. "Sisters, mom? No, I thought they might be. Accuse I have a sister myself. Not that I would make bold for to draw comparisons, even in my own mind, for she is only a common woman, a one, as ever you see. But few women rise above the common. Last Sunday, in yon village church, I heard the minister read out that one man in 1,000 had been found, but one woman in all these. He says, have I not found? And I think to myself, right you are, but I warrant he never met your ladyship." A laugh, thinly disguised as a cough, escaped from Miss Carpenter. Young lady, a catching cold. I am afraid, he said with respectful solicitude. Do you think the rain will last long? Said Agatha politely. The man examined the sky with a weather-rice air for some moment. Then he turned to Agatha and replied humbly, The Lord only knows, miss. It is not for a common man like me to say. Silence ensued, during which Agatha, furtively scrutinizing the tenant of the chalet, noticed that his face and neck were cleaner and less sunburned than those of the ordinary toilers of Laverne. His hands were hidden by large gardening gloves stained with coal dust. Laverne labourers, as a rule, had little objection to soil their hands. They never wore gloves. Still, she thought, there was no reason why an eccentric workman, insufferably talkative and capable of an allusion to the pen of the poet, should not indulge himself with cheap gloves, but then the silver-mounted umbrella. The young ladies, he said suddenly, holding out the umbrella, is fixed on this here. I am well aware that it is not for the lowest of the law to carry a gentleman's brolly, and I ask your ladyship's pardon for the liberty. I come by it accidental like, and should be glad of a reasonable offer from my gentleman in want of a honest article. As he spoke to gentlemen, much in want of the article, as their clinging wet coats showed, ran through the gateway and made for the chalet. Fairholme arrived first, exclaiming, Fearful shower, and briskly turned his back to the ladies in order to stand at the edge of the veranda and shake the water out of his hat. Joseph came next, shrinking from the damp contact of his own garments. He cringed to Miss Wilson and hoped that she had escaped a wetting. So far I have, she replied. The question is, how are we to get home? Oh, it is only a shower, said Joseph, looking up cheerfully at the unbroken curtain of cloud. It will clear up presently. It ain't for a common man to set up his opinion against a gentleman. What have professional knowledge of the heavens, as one may say, said the man. But I would humbly offer but my umbrella to his wide-awake that it doesn't cease remaining his side of 7 o'clock. That man lives here, whispered Miss Wilson, and I suppose he want to get rid of us. Said Fairholme. Then, turning to the strange laborer with the air of a person not to be trifled with, he raised his voice and said, You live here, do you, my man? I do, sir. By your good leave, if I may make so bold. What is your name? Jeff Smilash, sir, and your service. Where do you come from? Brixton Bury, sir. Brixton Bury. Where is that? Well, sir, I don't right now. If a gentleman like you, knowing geography and such, can't tell, how can I? You ought to know there you were born. Man, haven't you got common sense? Where could such a one as me get common sense, sir? Besides, I was only a foundling. Maybe I once won at all. Did I see you at church last Sunday? No, sir. I only come on Wednesday. Well, let me see you there next Sunday, said Fairholme shortly, turning away from him. Miss Wilson looked at the weather at Joseph's, who was conversing with Jane, and finally at Smilash, who knuckled his forehead without waiting to be addressed. Have you a boy whom you can send to Levern to get us a convenience, a carriage? I will give him a shilling for his trouble. A shilling? Said Smilash joyfully. Your ladyship is a noble lady. 2 4-wheeled cabs. There is 8 on you. There is only one cab in Levern, said Miss Wilson. Take this car to Mr. Marsh, the jotmaster, and tell him the predicament we are in. He will send vehicles. Smilash took the card and read it at a glance. He then went into the chalet, reappearing presently in a sou'wester and oilskins. He ran off through the rain and vaulted over the gate with ridiculous elegance. No sooner had he vanished than he often happened to remarkable men. He became the subject of conversation. A decent workman, said Joseph, a well-mannered man, considering his class. A born fool, though, said Fairholme. Or a rogue, said Agatha, emphasizing the suggestion by a glitter of her eyes and teeth, whilst her schoolfellows, rather disapproving of her freedom, stood stiffly dumb. He told Miss Wilson that he had a sister, and that he had been in church last Sunday, and he has just told you that he is a foundling, and that he only came last Wednesday. His assent is put on, and he can read, and I don't believe he is a workman at all. Perhaps he is a burglar, come down to steal the college plate. Agatha, said Miss Wilson gravely, you must be very careful how you say things of that kind. But it is so obvious. His explanation about the umbrella was made up to disarm suspicion. He handled it and learned to it in a way that showed how much more familiar it was to him than that new spade he was so anxious about. And all his clothes are new. True, said Fairholme, but there is not much in all that. Workmen nowadays ape gentlemen in everything. However, I will keep an eye on him. Oh, thank you so much, said Agatha. Fairholme, suspecting mockery, frowned, and Miss Wilson looked severely at the mocker. Little more was said, except as to the chances, manifestly small, of the rain ceasing, until the top of the cab, a decayed mourning coach, and 3 dripping hats were seen over the hedge. Smilash sat on the box of the coach, beside the driver. When it stopped, he alighted, re-entered the chalet without speaking, came out with the umbrella, spread it above Miss Wilson's head, and said, Now, if your ladyship will come with me, I will see you dry into the stray, and then I will bring your honoured nieces one by one. I shall come last, said Miss Wilson, irritated by his assumption that the party was a family one. Gertrude, you had better go first. Allow me, said Fairholme, stepping forward and attempt to take the umbrella. Thank you, I shall not trouble you, she said frostily, and dripped off through the rain across the hill without taking the least notice of the astonished persons. In the meantime, Miss Wilson, unable to contain her annoyance at Agatha's extravagance, spoke it to the girls who shared the coach with her. But Jane declared that Agatha only possessed 3 pence in the world. and therefore could not possibly have given the man 30 times that sum. Then they reached the college. Agatha, confronted with Miss Wilson, opened her eyes in the wonder and exclaimed laughing, "I only gave him 3 pence. He has sent me a present of 4 and 9 pence." Chapter 4. Saturday at Alton College, nominally a half-holiday, was really a whole one. Classes in gymnastics, dancing, elocution, and drawing were held in the morning. The afternoon was spent at lawn tennis, to which ladies' guests resident in the neighborhood were allowed to bring their husbands, brothers, and fathers. Miss Wilson, being anxious to send her pupil forth into the world free from the uncouth stiffness of schoolgirls unaccustomed to society. Late in October came a Saturday which proved anything but a holiday for Miss Wilson. At 1:30, luncheon being over, she went out of doors to a lawn that lay between the southern side of the college and the strawberry. Here she found a group of girls watching Agatha and Jane, who were dragging a roller over the grass. One of them, tossing a ball about with her racket, happened to drive it into the strawberry, whence, to the surprise of the company, Smilash presently emerged, carrying the ball, blinking and proclaiming that, though a common man, he had his feelings like another's, and that his eye was neither a stick nor a stone. He was dressed as before, but his garments, soiled with clay and lime, no longer looked new. "What brings you here, pray?" demanded Miss Wilson. "I was led into the belief that you sent for me, lady," he replied. "The taker's lad told me so as he passed my ample court this morning. I thought he were incapable of deceit." "That is quite right. I did send for you. But why did you not go round to the servant hall?" "I am at present in search of it, lady. I were looking for it when this ball caught me here." A cruel blow on the head naturally spoils its vision and expression and makes a honest man look like a thief. "Agatha," said Miss Wilson, "come here." "My duty to you, miss," said Smilash, pulling his forelock. "This is the man from whom I had 5 shillings, which he said you had just given him. Did you do so?" "Certainly not. I only gave him 3 pence. But I showed the money to your ladyship," said Smilash, twisting his hat agitatedly. "I gave it you. Where would you, the like of me, get 5 shillings except by the bounty of the rich and noble? If the young lady think I hadn't ought to have kept the t'other half-crown, I would not object to its being stopped from my wages, if I were given a job of work here, but it is nonsense," said Agatha. "I never gave you 3 half-crowns. Perhaps you made a mistake. Pence is somewhat similar to half-crowns, and the day were very dark." "I couldn't have," said Agatha. "Jane had my purse all the earlier part of the week, Miss Wilson, and she can tell you that there was only 3 pence in it. You know that I get my money on the first of every month. It never lasts longer than a week. The idea of my having 7 and 6 pence on the 16th is ridiculous. But I put it to you, miss, ain't it twice and ridiculous for me, a poor laborer, to give up money what I never got? vague alarm crept upon Agatha as the testimony of her sense was contradicted. "All I know is this," she protested. "That did not give it to you, so my pennies must have turned into half-crowns in your pocket." "Maybe so," said Smilash gravely. "I have heard, and I know it for a fact, that money grows in the pocket of rich. Why not in the pocket of the poor as well? Why should you be surprised at what happens every day? Had you any money of your own about you at the time? Where could the like of me get money?" "Asking pardon for making so bold as to catechize your ladyship. I don't know where you could get it," said Miss Wilson restily. "I ask you, had you any? Well, lady, I disremember. I will not impose upon you. I disremember." "Then you have made a mistake," said Miss Wilson, handing him back his money. "Here, if it is not yours, it is not yours. So you had better keep it. Keep it, oh lady. But this is the height of nobility, and what shall I do to earn your bounty, lady?" "It is not my bounty. I give it to you because it does not belong to me, and I suppose must belong to you. You seem to be a very simple man. I think, your ladyship, I hope I am respecting the lady's work. Now, lady, was you thinking of employing a poor man at all?" "No, thank you. I have no occasion for your service. I have also to give you the shilling I promised you for getting the cabs. Here it is." "Another shilling," cried Smilash, stupefied. "Yes," said Miss Wilson, beginning to feel very angry. "Let me hear no more about it, please. Don't you understand that you have earned it?" "I am a common man and understand next to nothing," he replied reverently. "But if your ladyship would give me a day's work to keep me going, I could put up all this money in a little wooden saving bank I have at home, and keep it to spend when sickness or old age shall, in a manner of speaking, lay their hands upon me. I could smooth that grass beautiful. Then, young ladies, I will strain themselves with that heavy roller. It, if tennis is the word, I can put up nets fit to catch birds of paradise in. If the course is to be chalked out in white, I can draw a line so straight that you could hardly keep yourself from erecting an equilateral triangle on it. I am honest when well watched, and I can wait at table equal to the Lord Mayor or London's butler. I cannot employ you without a character," said Miss Wilson, amused by his scrap of Euclid and wondering where he had picking it up. "I bear the best of characters, lady. The Reverend Rector has known me from a boy. I was speaking to him about you yesterday," said Miss Wilson, looking hard at him, "and he says you are a perfect stranger to him." "Gentleman, he is so forgetful," said Smilash sadly. "But I alluded to my native rector, meaning the rector of my native village, Auburn, Seed Auburn, loveliest village of the plain, as the gentleman called it." "That was not the name you mentioned to Mr. Fairholme. I do not recollect what name you gave, but it was not Auburn. Nor have I ever heard of any such place. Never read of Seed of Auburn. Not in any geography or gazetteer? Do you recollect telling me that you have been in prison? Only 6 times, pleaded Smilash, his features working convulsively. Don't bear too hard on a common man. Only 6 times, and all through drink. But I have took the pledge and kept it faithful for 18 months past. Miss Wilson now sat down the man as one of those keen, half-witted country fellows, contemptuously stylish original, who unintentionally make themselves popular by flattering the sense of sanity in those whose faculties are better adapted to circumstances. You have a bad memory, Mr. Smilash, she said good-humouredly. You never give the same account of yourself twice. I am well aware that I do not express myself with acceptability. Ladies and gentlemen have that power over words that they can always say what they mean. But a common man like me can't. Words don't come natural to him. He has more thoughts than words, and what words he has don't fit his thoughts. Might I take a turn with the roller and make myself useful about the place until nightfall for 9 pence? Miss Wilson, who was expecting more than her usual Saturday visitors, considered the proposition and assented. And remember, she said, then as you are a stranger here, your character in Leeward depends upon the use you make of this opportunity. I am grateful to you, your noble ladyship. May your ladyship's goodness sew up the hole which is in the pocket where I carry my character, and which has caused me to lose it so frequent. It is a bad place for men to keep their character in, but such is the fashion, and so hooray for the glorious 19th century. He took off his coat, seized the roller, and began to pull it with an energy foreign to the measured mill-horse manner of the accustomed laborer. Miss Wilson looked doubtfully at him, but being in haste, went indoor without further comment. The girls, mistrusting his eccentricity, kept aloof. Agatha determined to have another and better look at him. Racket in hand, she walked slowly across the grass and came close to him, just as he, unaware of her approach, uttered a groan of exhaustion and sat down to rest. Tired already, Mr. Smilash, she said mockingly. He looked up deliberately, took off one of his wash leather gloves, fanned himself with it, displaying a white and fine hand, and at last replied, in the tone and with the accent of a gentleman, very. Agatha recoiled. He fanned himself without the least concern. You are not a laborer, she said at last. Obviously not. I thought not. He nodded. Suppose I tell you, she said, growing bolder as she recollected that she was not alone with him. If you do, I shall get out of it, just as I got out of the half-crowns, and Miss Wilson will begin to think that you are mad. Then I really did not give you the 7 and 6 pence, she said, relieved. What is your own opinion? He answered, taking 3 pennies from his pocket, jiggling them in his palm. What is your name? I shall not tell you, said Agatha with dignity. He struggled his shoulders. Perhaps you are right, he said. I would not tell you mine if you ask me. I have not the slightest intention of asking you. No. Then Smilash shall do for you, and Agatha will do for me. You had better take care. Of what? Of what you say. And you are not afraid of being found out. I am found out already by you, and I am none the worse. Suppose the police find you out. Not they. Besides, I am not hiding from the police. I have a right to wear corduroy if I prefer it to broadcloth. Consider the advantages of it. It has procured me admission to Alton College and the pleasure of your acquaintances. Will you excuse me if I go on with my rolling? Just to keep up appearances, I can talk as I roll. You may, if you are fond of soliloquism, she said, turning away as the rose. Seriously, Agatha, you must not tell the others about me. Do not call me Agatha, she said impetuously. What shall I call you then? You need not address me at all. I need and I will. Don't be ill-natured. But I don't know you. I wonder at your. She hesitated at the word which occurred to her, but being unable to think of a better one, used it. At your cheek. He laughed, and she watched him take a couple of turns with the roller, presently refreshing himself by a look at her. He caught her looking at him and smiled. His smile was commonplace in comparison with the one she gave him in return, in which her eyes, her teeth, and the golden green in her complexion seemed to flash simultaneously. He stopped rolling immediately and rested his chin on the handle of the roller. If you neglected your work, said she maliciously, you won't have the grass ready when the people come. What people? He said, taken aback. Oh, lots of people, most likely some who know you. There are visitors coming from London. My guardian, my guardianess, their daughter, my mother, and about 100 more. For in all, what are they coming for? To see you? To take me away, she replied, watching for signs of disappointment on his part. They were at once forthcoming. What the deuce are they going to take you away for? He said. Is your education finished? No, I have behaved badly and I am going to be expelled. He laughed again. Come, he said, you are beginning to invent in the smilish manner. What have you done? I don't see. Why, I should tell you. What have you done? I have done nothing. I am only an unromantic gentleman, hiding from a romantic lady who is in love with me. Poor thing, said Agatha sarcastically. Of course, she has proposed to you and you have refused. On the contrary, I proposed and she accepted. That is why I have to hide. You tell stories charmingly, said Agatha. Goodbye. Here is Miss Carpenter coming to hear what we are talking about. Goodbye. That story of your being expelled beats. Might a common man make so bold as to inquire where the whitening machine is, miss? It was addressed to Jane, who had come up with some of the others. Agatha expected to see Smilash presently discovered, for his disguise now seemed transparent. She wondered how the rest could be imposed on by it. 2 o'clock, striking just then, reminded her of the impending interview with her guardian. A tremor shook her, and she felt a craving for some solitary hiding place in which to await the summons. But it was a point of honor with her to appear perfectly indifferent to her trouble. So she stayed with the girls, laughing and chatting as they watched Smilash intently marking out the cords and setting up the nets. She made the other laughing too, for her hidden excitement, sharpened by irrepressible shootings of dread, stimulated her, and the romance of Smilash disguise gave her a sensation of dreaming. Her imagination was already busy upon a drama of which she was the heroine and Smilash the hero. Though with the real man before her, she could not indulge herself by attributing to him quite as much gloomy grandeur of character as to a wholly ideal personage. The plot was simple and an old favorite with her. One of them was to love the other and to die broken-hearted because the loved one would not requite the passion. For Agatha, prompt to ridicule sentimentally in her companions and gifted with an infectious spirit of farce, secretly turned for imaginative luxury to visions of despair and death, and often endure the mortification of the successful clown who believes, whilst the public roar with laughter at him, that he was born a tragedian. There was much in her nature. She felt that it did not find expression in her popular representation of the soldier in the chimney. By 3 o'clock, the local visitors had arrived and tennis was proceeding in 4 courts, rolled and prepared by Smilash. The 2 curates were there, with a few lay gentlemen, Mrs. Miller, the vicar, and some mothers and other chaperons looked on and consumed light refreshment, which were brought out upon trays by Smilash, who had borrowed and put on a large white apron and was making himself officiously busy. At a 1/4 the hour, a message came from Miss Wilson, requesting Miss Wheely's attendance. The visitors were at a loss to account for the sudden distraction of the young lady's attention, which ensued. Jane almost burst into tears and answered Joseph rudely when he innocently asked what the matter was. Agatha went away apparently unconcerned, though her hand shook as she put aside her racket. In a spacious drawing room at the north side of the college, she found her mother, a slight woman in widow's weed, with faded brown hair and tearful eyes. With her were Mrs. Jansenus and her daughter. The 2 elder ladies kept severely silent, whilst Agatha kissed them, and Mrs. Whaley sniffed. Henrietta embraced Agatha effusively. "Where is Uncle John?" said Agatha. "Hasn't he come?" "He is in the next room with Miss Wilson," said Mrs. Jansius coldly. "They want you in there." "I thought somebody was dead," said Agatha. "You all look so funeral. Now, Mamma, put your handkerchief back again. If you cry, I will give Miss Wilson a piece of my mind for worrying you." "No, no," said Mrs. Whaley, alarmed. "She has been so nice, so good," said Henrietta. "She has been perfectly reasonable and kind," said Mrs. Jansenus. "She always is," said Agatha complacently. "You didn't expect to find her in hysterics, did you?" said Agatha complacently. "You didn't expect to find her in hysterics, did you?" Agatha pleased Mrs. Whaley. "Don't be headstrong and foolish." "Oh, she won't. I know she won't," said Henrietta coaxingly. "Will you, dear Agatha?" "You may do as you like, as far as I am concerned," said Mrs. Jansenus. But I hope you have more sense than to throw away your education for nothing. Your aunt is quite right, said Mrs. Whaley, and your Uncle John is very angry with you. He will never speak to you again if you quarrel with Miss Wilson. He is not angry, said Henrietta, but he is so anxious that you should get on well. He will naturally be disappointed if you persist in making a fool of yourself, said Mrs. Jansius. Old Miss Wilson wants to an apology for the dreadful things you wrote in her book, said Mrs. Whaley. You will apologize, dear, won't you? Of course, she will, said Henrietta. I think you had better, said Mrs. Jansius. Perhaps I will, said Agatha. That is my own darling, said Mrs. Whaley, catching her hand. And perhaps again I won't. You will, dear, urged Mrs. Whaley, trying to draw Agatha, who passively resisted, closer to her. For my sake, to oblige your mother, Agatha, you won't refuse me, dearest. Agatha laughed indulgently at her parent, who had long ago worn out this form of appeal. Then she turned to Henrietta and said, How is your caro sposo? I think it was hard that I was not a bridesmaid. The red in Henrietta's cheek brightened. Mrs. Jansinus hastened to interpose a dry reminder that Miss Wilson was waiting. Oh, she does not mind waiting, said Agatha, because she thinks you are all at work getting me into a proper frame of mind. That was the arrangement she made with you before she left the room. Mamma knows what I have a little bird that I tell me these things. I must say that you have not made me feel any goodier so far. However, as poor Uncle John must be dreadfully frightened and uncomfortable, it is only kind to put an end to his suspense. Goodbye. And she went out leisurely, but she looked in again and said in a low voice, Prepare for something thrilling. I feel just in the humor to say the most awful thing. She vanished, and immediately they heard her tapping at the door of the next room. Mr. Jansinus was indeed awaiting her with misgiving, having discovered early in his career that his dignified person and fine voice caused people to stand in some awe of him and to move him into the chair at public meetings. He had grown so accustomed to deference that any approach to familiarity or irreverence disconcerted him exceedingly. Agatha, on the other hand, having from her childhood heard Uncle John quoted as wisdom and authority incarnate, had begun in her tender years to scoff at him as a pompous and purse-proud city merchant whose sordid mind was unable to cope with her transcendental affairs. She had habitually terrified her mother by ridiculing him with an absolute contempt of which only childhood and extreme ignorance are capable. She had felt humiliated by his kindness to her, and with the instinct of an anarchist, had taken disparagement of his advice and defiance of his authority as the sign wherefrom she might infer surely that her face was turned to the light. The result was that he was a little tired of her without being quite conscious of it, and she not at all afraid of him, and a little too conscious of it, when she entered with her brightest smile in full play. Miss Wilson and Mr. Jansenus, seated at the table, looked somewhat like two culprits about to be indicted. Miss Wilson waited for him to speak, deferring to his imposing presence. But he was not ready, so she invited Agatha to sit down. "Thank you," said Agatha sweetly. "Well, Uncle John, don't you know me? I have heard with regret from Miss Wilson that you have been very troublesome here," he said, ignoring her remark, though secretly put out by it. "Yes," said Agatha contritely. "I am so very sorry." Mr. Jansenus, who had been led by Miss Wilson to expect the utmost contumacy, looked to her in surprise. "You seem to think," said Miss Wilson, conscious of Mr. Jansenus' movement and annoyed by it, "that you may transgress over and over again, and then set yourself right with us." Miss Wilson never spoke of offences as against her individual authority, but as against the school community, by saying that "you are sorry. You spoke in a very different tone at our last meeting. I was angry then, Miss Wilson, and I thought I had a grievance. Everybody think they have the same one. Besides, we were quarreling. At last I was, and I always behave badly when I quarrel. I am so very sorry." "The book was a serious matter," said Miss Wilson gravely. "You do not seem to think so. I understand Agatha to say that she is now sensible of the folly of her conduct with regard to the book, and that she is sorry for it," said Mr. Jansenus, instinctively inclining to Agatha's party as the stronger one and the least dependent on him in a pecuniary sense. "Have you seen the book?" said Agatha eagerly. "No. Miss Wilson has described what has occurred." "Oh, do let me get it," she cried, rising. "It will make Uncle John scream with laughing. May I, Miss Wilson?" "There," said Miss Wilson indignantly. "It is this incorrigible flippancy of which I have to complain. Miss Whaley only varies it by downright insubordination." Mr. Jansenus too was scandalized. His fine colour mounted at the idea of his screaming. "Tut, tut," he said, "you must be serious and more respectful to Miss Wilson. You are old enough to know better now, Agatha. Quite old enough." Agatha's mirth vanished. "What have I said? What have I done?" she asked, a faint purple spot appeared in her cheeks. "You have spoken triffingly of the volume of which Miss Wilson sets great store, and properly so. If properly so, then why do you find fault with me?" "Come, come," roared Mr. Jansenus, deliberately losing his temper, at a last expedient to subdue her. "Don't be impertinent, miss." Agatha's eyes dilated. Evanescent flush played upon her cheeks and neck. She stamped with her heel. "Uncle John," she cried, "if you dare to address me like that, I will never look at you, never speak to you, nor ever enter your house again. What do you know about good manners?" that you should call me impertinent. I will not submit to intentional rudeness. That was the beginning of my quarrel with Miss Wilson. She told me I was impertinent, and I went away and told her that she was wrong by writing it in the fault book. She has been wrong although, and I would have said so before, but that I wanted to be reconciled to her and to let bygones be bygones. But if she insisted on quarreling, I cannot help it. I have already explained to you, Mr. Jansinus, said Miss Wilson, concentrating her resentment by an effort to suppress it, that Miss Whaley has ignored all the opportunities that have been made for her to reinstate herself here. Mrs. Miller and I have waived merely personal considerations, and I have only required a simple acknowledgement of this offense against the college and its rules. I do not care that for Mrs. Miller, said Agatha, snapping her fingers, and you are not half so good as I thought. Agatha, said Mr. Jansius, I desire you to hold your tongue. Agatha drew a deep breath, sat down resignedly, and said, There, I have done. I have lost my temper, so now we have all lost our tempers. You have no right to lose your temper, miss, said Mr. Jansius, following up a fancied advantage. I am the youngest and the least to blame, she replied. There is nothing further to be said, Mr. Jansius, said Miss Wilson determinedly. I am sorry that Miss Whaley has chosen to break with us, but I have not chosen to break with you, and I think it very hard that I am to be sent away. Nobody here has the least quarrel with me, except you and Mrs. Miller. Mrs. Miller is annoyed because she mistook me for her cat, as if that was my fault. And really, Miss Wilson, I don't know why you are so angry. All the girls will think I have done something infamous if I am expelled. I ought to be let stay until the end of the term. And as to the the fault book, you told me most particularly when I first came that I might write in it or not just as I pleased, and that you never dictated or interfered with what was written. And yet the very first time I write a word you disapprove of, you expel me. Nobody will ever believe now that the entries are voluntary. Miss Wilson's conscience, already smitten by the coarseness and absence of moral force in the echo of her own. You are impertinent, from the mouth of Mr. Jansinus took fresh alarm. The fault book, she said, is for the purpose of recording self-approach alone, and is not a vehicle for accusation against others. I am quite sure that neither Jane nor Gertrude nor I reproached ourselves in the last for going downstairs as we did, and yet you did not blame us for entering that. Besides, the book represented moral force. At least you always said so. And when you gave up moral force, I thought an entry should be made of that. Of course, I was in a rage at the time. But when I came to myself, I thought I had done right. And I think so still, though it would perhaps have been better to have passed it over. Why do you say that I gave up moral force? Telling people to leave the room is not moral force. Calling them impertinent is not moral force. You think then that I am bound to listen patiently to whatever you choose to say to me, however unbecoming it may be from one is your position to one is in mine. But I said nothing. Unbecoming, said Agatha, then breaking off restlessly and smiling again. She said, "Oh, don't let us argue. I am very sorry and very troublesome and very fond of you and of the college, and I won't come back next term unless you like." "Agatha," said Miss Wilson, shaken, "these expressions of regard cost you so little, and then they have affected their purpose, are so soon forgotten by you, that they have ceased to satisfy me. I am very reluctant to insist on your leaving us at once, but as your uncle has told you, you are old and sensible enough to know the difference between order and disorders. Hitherto, you have been on the side of disorder, an element which was hardly known here until you came, as Mrs. Trapezus can tell you. Nevertheless, if you will promise to be more careful in future, I will waive all past cause of complaint, and at the end of the term I shall be able to judge as to your continuing among us." Agatha rose, beaming. "Dear Miss Wilson," she said, "you are so good. I promise, of course. I will go and tell Mamma." Before they could add a word, she had turned with a pirouette to the door, and Field presenting herself a moment later in the drawing room to the three ladies, whom she surveyed with the whimsical smile in silence. "Well," said Mrs. Jansenus peremptorily. "Well, dear," said Mrs. Trapezus caressingly. Mrs. Whaley stifled a sob and looked imploringly at her daughter. "I had no end of trouble in bringing them to reason," said Agatha after a provoked pause. "They behaved like children, and I was like an angel. I am to stay, of course." "Blessings on you, my darling," faltered Mrs. Whaley, attempting a kiss, which Agatha dexterously evaded. "I have promised to be very good and studious and quiet and decorous in future. Do you remember my consonant song, Hitty?" And she danced about the room, snapping her fingers instead of castanets. "Don't be so reckless and wicked, my love," said Mrs. Whaley. "You will break your poor mother's heart." Miss Wilson and Mr. Jansius entered just then, and Agatha became motionless and gazed abstractedly at a vase of flowers. Miss Wilson invited her visitors to join the tennis players. Mr. Jansenus looked sternly and disappointedly at Agatha, who elevated her left eyebrow and depressed her right simultaneously. But he shaken his head to signify that he was not to be consolated by facial feats, however difficult or contrary to nature, went out with Miss Wilson, followed by Mrs. Jansenus and Mrs. Whaley. "How is your hubby?" said Agatha then brusquely to Henrietta. Mrs. Trapez's eyes filled with tears so quickly that, as she bent her head to hide them, they fell, sprinkling Agatha's hand. "This is such a dear old place," she began. "The association of my girlhood." "What is the matter between you and hubby?" demanded Agatha, interrupting her. "You had better tell me, or I will ask him when I meet him." "I was about to tell you, only you did not give me time." "That is a most awful crumb," said Agatha, "but no matter, go on." Henrietta hesitated. Her dignity as a married woman and the reality of her grief revolted against the shallow acuteness of the schoolgirl. But she found herself no better able to resist Agatha's domineering than she had been in her childhood, and much more desirous of obtaining her sympathy. Besides, she had already learned to tell the story herself rather than leave its narration to others. Those accounts did not, she felt, put her case in the proper light. So she told Agatha of her marriage, her wild love for her husband, his wild love for her, and his mysterious disappearance without leaving word or sign behind him. She did not mention the latter. "Have you had him searching for?" said Agatha, repressing an inclination to laugh. "But where? Had I the remotest clue, I would follow him barefoot to the end of the world. I think you ought to search all the rivers. You would have to do that barefoot. He must have fallen in somewhere or fallen down someplace. No, no. Do you think I should be here if I thought his life in danger? I have reasons. I know that he is only gone away. Oh, indeed, he took his portmanteau with him. Did he? Perhaps he has gone to Paris to buy you something nice and give you a pleasant surprise." "No," said Henrietta dejectedly. "He knew that I wanted nothing. Then I suppose he got tired of you and ran away." Henrietta's peculiar scarlet blue flowered rapidly over her cheeks as she flung Agatha's arm away, exclaiming, "How dare you say so? You have no hurt. He adored me." "Bosh," said Agatha. "People always grow tired of one another. I grow tired of myself whenever I am left alone for 10 minutes, and I am certain that I am fonder of myself than anyone can be of another person." "I know you are," said Henrietta, pained and spiteful. "You have always been particularly fond of yourself. Very likely he resembles me in that respect. In that case, he will grow tired of himself and come back, and you will both look like turtle doves until he runs away again. Oh, serve you right for getting married. I wonder how people can be mad as to do it, with the example of their married acquaintances all warning them against it." "You don't know what it is to love," said Henrietta plaintively and yet patronizingly. "Besides, we were not like other couples." "So it seems, but never mind. Take my word for it. He will return to you as soon as he had enough of his own company. Don't worry thinking about him, but come and have a game at lawn tennis." During this conversation, they had left the drawing room and made a detour through the grounds. They were now approaching the tennis court by a path which wound between two laurel hedges through the strawberry. Meanwhile, Smilash waiting on the guests in his white apron and gloves, which he had positively refused to take off, alleging that he was a common man with common hands such as born ladies and gentlemen could not be expected to take meat and drink from, had behaved himself until the arrival of Miss Wilson and her visitors, which occurred as he was returning to the table with an empty tray, moving so swiftly that he nearly came into collision with Mrs. Jansinus. Instead of apologizing, he changed countenance. hastily held up the tray like a shield before his face, and began to walk backward from her, stumbling presently against Miss Lindsay, who was running to return a ball, without heeding her angry look and curt rebuke. He half turned and sidled away into the strawberry, whence the tray presently rose into the air, flew across the laurel hedge, and descended with a peal of stage thunder on the stooped shoulders of Joseph. Miss Wilson, after asking the housekeeper with some asperity why she had allowed that man to interfere in the attendance, explained to the guests that he was the idiot of the countryside. Mr. Jansenius laughed and said that he had not seen man's face, but that his figure reminded him possibly of someone. He could not just then recollect exactly whom. Smilash, making off through the strawberry, found the end of his path blocked by Agatha and a young lady whose appearance alarmed him more than had that of Mrs. Jansenus. He attempted to force his tray through the hedge, but in vain. The laurel was impenetrable, and the noise he made attracted the attention of the approaching couple. He made no further effort to escape, but threw his borrowed apron over his head and stood bolt upright with his back against the bushes. "What is that man doing there?" said Henrietta, stopping mistrustfully. Agatha laughed and said loudly, so that he might hear, "It is only a harmless madness that Miss Wilson employs. He is fond of disguising himself in some silly way and trying to frighten us. Don't be afraid. Come on." Henrietta hung back, but her arms was locked in Agatha's, and she was drawn along in spite of herself. Smilash did not move. Agatha strolled on coolly, and as she passed him, adroitly caught the apron between her finger and thumb and twitched it from his face. Instantly Henrietta uttered a piercing scream, and Smilash caught her in his arm. "Quick," he said to Agatha, "she is fainting. Run for some water, run." And he bent over Henrietta, who clung to his frantically. Agatha, bewildered by the effect of her practical joke, hesitated a moment and then ran to the lawn. "What is the matter?" said Fairholme. "Nothing. I want some water, quick, please. Henrietta has fainted in the strawberry. That is all." "Please do not stir," said Miss Wilson authoritatively. "You will crowd the path and delay useful assistance. Miss Ward, kindly get some water and bring it to us. Agatha, come with me and point out where Mrs. Professor is. You may come too, Miss Carpenter. You are so strong. The rest will please remain where they are." Followed by the two girls, she hurried into the strawberry, where Mrs. Jansenus was already looking anxiously for his daughter. He was the only person they found there. Smilash and Henrietta were gone. At first the seekers, merely puzzled, did nothing but question. Agatha incredulously asked the exact spot on which Henrietta had fallen, but Mr. Jansenus soon made them understand that the position of a lady in the hand of a half-witted laborer was one of danger. His agitation affected them, and then Agatha endeavored to reassure him by declaring that Smilash was a disguised gentleman. Miss Wilson, supposing this to be a mere repetition of her former idyll, conjuncture told her sharply to hold her tongue, as the time was not one for talking nonsense. The news now spread through the whole company, and the excitement became intense. Fairholme shouted for volunteers to make up a searching party. All the men present responded, and they were about to rush to the college gates in a body when it occurred to the cooler among them that they had better divide into several parties in order that search might be made at once in different quarters. 10 minutes of confusion followed. Mr. Jansenus started several times in quest of Henrietta, and when he had gone a few steps, returned and begged that no more time should be wasted. Joseph, whose faith was simple, retired to pray, and did good, as far as it went, by withdrawing one voice from the din of plans, objections and suggestions which the rest were making, each person trying to be heard about the other. At last Miss Wilson quelled the prevailing anarchy. Servants were sent to alarm the neighbors and call in the village police. Detachments were sent in various directions under the command of Fairholme and other energetic spirits. The girls formed parties among themselves, which were reinforced by male deserters from the previous levies. Miss Wilson then went indoor and conducted a search through the interior of the college. Only 2 persons were left on the tennis ground, Agatha and Mrs. Jansenus, who had been surprisingly calm throughout. "You need not be anxious," said Agatha, who had been standing aloof since her rebuff by Miss Wilson. "I am sure there is no danger. It is most extraordinary that they have gone away, but the man is no more mad than I am, and I know he is a gentleman. He told me so." "Let us hope for the best," said Mrs. Jansenus smoothly. "I think I will sit down. I feel too tired, thanks." Agatha had handed her a chair. "What did you say he told you?" This man, Agatha related the circumstances of her acquaintances with Smilash, adding, at Mrs. Jansenus' request, a minute description of his personal appearance. Mrs. Jansenus remarked that it was very singular, and that she was sure Henrietta was quite safe. She then partook of claret cup and sandwiches. Agatha, though glad to find someone disposed to listen to her, was puzzled by her own coolness, and was even goaded into pointing out that though Smilash was not a laborer, it did not follow that he was an honest man. But Mrs. Jansenus only said, "Oh, she is safe, quite safe, at least, of course. I can only hope so. We shall have news presently," and took another sandwich. The searchers soon began to return. Baffled, a few shepherds, the only person in the vicinity, had been asked whether they had seen a young lady and a laborer. Some of them had been a young woman with a basket of clothes, if it must be her. Some thought that Phil Martin, the carrier, would see her, if anybody would. None of them had any positive information to give. As soon as afternoon won, and party after party returned, tired and unsuccessful, depression replaced excitement. Conversation, no longer tumultuous, was carried on in whispers, and some of the local visitors slipped away to their homes with a growing conviction that something unpleasant had happened, and that it would be as well not to be mixed up on it. Mr. Jansenus, though a few words from his wife had surprised and somewhat calmed him, was still pitiably restless and uneasy. At last the police arrived. At sight of their uniforms, excitement revived. There was a general conviction that something effectual would be done now, but the constables were only mortal, and in a few moments a whisper spread that they were fooled. They doubted everything told them, and expressed their contempt for amateur searching by entering on a fresh investigation, praying with the greatest care into the least probable places. Two of them went off to the chalet to look for Smilash, then fell home, sunburnt, perspiring and dusty, but still energetic. Brought back the exhausted remnant of his party with a sullen boy, who scolded infinitely at the police, evidently believing that he was about to be delivered into their custody. Fairholme had been everywhere, and having seen nothing of the missing pair, had come to the conclusion that they were now here. He had asked everybody for information, and had let them know that he meant to have it too, if it was to be had. But it was not to be had. The sole result of his labor was the evidence of the boy, whom he didn't believe. "I am," said the inspector, not quite pleased by Fairholme's zeal, and yet overborne by it. "You are Wickens' boy, ain't you?" "Yes, I am Wickens' boy," said the witness, partly fierce, partly lachrymose. "And I say, I see him, and if anyone says I didn't see him, he's a lie." "Come," said the inspector sharply, "give us none of your cheek, but tell us what you saw, or you will have to deal with me afterwards." "I don't care who I deal with," said the boy at bay. "I can't be took for seeing him, because here is no law again it. I was in the gravel pit in the canal meadow, but business had you there," said the inspector, interrupting. "I got leave to be there," said the boy insolently, but reddening. "Who gave you leave?" said the inspector, collaring him. "Oh," he added, as the captive burst into tears, "I told you, you would have to deal with me. Now hold your noise, and remember where you are, and who are you speaking to, and perhaps I mayn't lock you up this time. Tell me what you saw when you were trespassing in the meadow." "I saw a young woman and a man, and I see her kissing him, and the gentleman won't believe me." "You mean you saw him kissing her?" "More likely, no, I don't. I know what it is to have a girl kiss you when you don't want, and I gave a search to frickin' him, and he called me and gave me twopence and says, 'You go to the devil,' he says, 'and don't tell no one you see me here, or else,' he says, 'I might be tempted to drown you,' he says, and what a shock that would be to your parents." "Oh yes, very likely," I says, "just like what?" Then I went away, because he knows Mr. Wickens, and I was afraid of his telling on me." The boy, being now subdued, questions were put to him from all sides, but his powers of observation and description went no further. As he was anxious to propitiate his captors, he answered as often as possible in the affirmative. Mr. Jansinus asked him whether the young woman he had seen was a lady, and he said yes. Was the man a laborer? Yes, after a moment's hesitation. How was she dressed? He hadn't taken notice. Had she red flowers in her hat? Yes. Had she a green dress? Yes. Were the flowers in her hat yellow? Agatha's question. Yes. Was her dress pink? Yes. Sure it wasn't black? No answer. I told you he was a liar, said Felham contemptuously. Well, I expect he is seen something, said the inspector, but what it was or who it was is more than I can get out of him. There was a pause, and they looked askance upon Wickens boy. His account of the kissing made it almost an insult to the Jansenist and to identify with Henrietta, the person he had seen. Jane suggested dragging the canal, but was silenced by an indignant combined by comprehensive and sympathetic glance at the bereaved parents. She was displaced from the focus of attention by the appearance of two policemen who had been sent to the chalet. Smilash was between them, apparently a prisoner. At a distance, he seemed to have suffered some frightful injury to his head, but when he was brought into the midst of the company, it appeared that he had twisted a red handkerchief about his face, as if to soothe a toothache. He had a particularly hangdog expression as he stood before the inspector with his head bowed and his countenance averted from Mr. Jansenus, who, attempting to scrutinize his features, could see nothing but a patch of red handkerchief. One of the policemen described how they had found Smilash in the act of entering his dwelling, how he had refused to give any information or to go to the college, and had defied them to take him there against his will, and how, on their at last proposing to send for the inspector and Mr. Jansenus, he had called them asses and consented to accompany them. The policeman concluded by declaring that the man was either drunk or designing, as he could not or would not speak sensibly. Look here, Governor, began Smilash to the inspector. I am a common man, no commoner going, as you may see for. That is, I am, cried Wickens boy, suddenly struck with a sense of his own importance as a witness. That is, I am, that the lady kissed, and that gave me twopence and threatened to drown me. And with a humble and contrite heart do I regret that I did not drown you, you young rascal, said Smilash. It isn't manners to interrupt the man who, though common, might be your father for years and wisdom. Hold your tongue, said the inspector to the boy. Now, Smilash, do not wish to make any statement. Be careful, for whatever you say may be used against you hereafter. If you was to lead me straight away to the scaffold, Colonel, I could tell you no more than the truth. If any man can say that he was heard Jeff Smilash tell a lie, let him stand forth. We don't want to hear about that, said the inspector. As you are a stranger in these parts, nobody here knows any bad of you. No more do they know any good of you neither. Colonel, said Smilash, deeply impressed, you have a penetrating mind, and you know a bad character at sight. Not to deceive you, I am that given to lying and laziness. and self-indulgence of all sorts. That the only excuse I can find for myself is that it is the nature of the race so to be. For most men is just as bad as me, and some of them worsen. I do not speak personal to you, Governor, nor to the honorable gentlemen here assembled, but then you, Colonial, are a inspector of police, which I take to be more than merely human, and ask to the gentleman here, a gentleman isn't a man, leastways not a common man, the common man being, but the slave would feed and clothes the gentleman beyond the common. Come, said the inspector, unable to follow these observations. You are a clever dodger, but you can't dodge me. Have you any statement to make with reference to the lady that was last seen in your company? Take a statement about a lady, said Smilash indignantly. Far be the thought for my mind, said Agatha impetuously. Don't be silly. You are not want to answer that, you know, said the inspector, a little put out by Agatha's taking advantage of her irresponsible, unofficial position. To come to directly to the point, you may, if you like, though, if you have done any harm, you would better hold your tongue. If not, you should better say so. I will set the young lady's mind at rest respecting her honorable sister, said Smilash. When the young lady caught sight of me, the fainted, being but a young man and not used to ladies, I will not deny, but that I were a bit scared, and that my mind were not open to the sensiblest consideration. When she unveils her orbs, so to speak, she catches me round the neck, not known me from Adam the father of us all, and says, bring me some water, and don't let the girls see me. Throw not even the intelligence to think for myself. I done just what she told me. I ups with her in my arms, she being a light weight and a slender figure, and makes for the canal as fast as I could. Then I got there. I lays her on my bank and goes for the water. But what with factories and pollutions and high civilizations of one sort and another, English canal water ain't fit to sprinkle on a lady, much less for her to drink. Just then, as luck would have it, a barge came along and looked her abroad. And I such a thing, said the vacant boy stubbornly, emboldened by witnessing the effrontery of one apparently of his own class. I saw you two standing together and her a kissing of you. There whom's no birch is the maiden modesty of a born lady to be disbelieved on the word of a common boy that only walks the earth by the sufferance of the landlords and money lords. He helps to feed, cried Smilash indignantly. Why, you young infidel, a lady ain't made of common brick like you. She don't know what a kiss means, and if she did, is it likely to that she would kiss me? Then a fine man like the inspector here would be only too happy to oblige her. Fay, for shame. The birch were red and yellow, with a green dragon for the figurehead and a white horse twin of it. Perhaps you are colorblind and can't distinguish red and yellow. The Bargi was moved to compassion by the sight of the poor fainting lady and the offer of a crown, and he had a mother that acted as a mother should. There was a cabin in that birch, about a big as the locker where your ladyship keeps your jam and pickles, and in that locker the Burgee lives, quite domestic, with his wife and mother and 5 children. The canal boat is what you may call the wooden wall of England. Come, get on with your story, said the inspector. We know what Burgess is as well as you. I wish more knew of him, retorted Smilash. Perhaps it had lightened your work a bit. However, as I was saying, we went right down the canal to Levern, where we got off, and the lady she took the railway omnibus and went away in it, with a noble open-handedness of her class. She gave me 6 pence. Here it is, in proof that my word is true, and I wish her safe home. And if I was on the rack, I could tell no more, except that when I got back, I were laid hands on by these here bobbies, contrary to Britain Constitution. And if your ladyship will kindly go to where that Constitution is wrote down, and find out what it says about my rights and liberties, for I have been told that the working man has his liberties, and have myself seen plenty took with him. You will oblige a common chap more than his education will enable him to express. Sir, cried Mr. Jansenus suddenly, will you hold up your head and look me in the face? Smilash did so, and immediately started theatrically, exclaiming, "Whom do I see? You would hardly believe it," he continued, addressing the company at large, "but I am well beckoned to this honorable gentleman. He see it upon your lips, Governor. I ask after my misuse, and I thank you for your condescending interest. She is well, sir, and my residence here is fully agreed upon between us. What little cloud may have rose upon our domestic horizon has passed away, and Governor," here Smilash's voice fell with graver emphasis, "then as interferes betwixt man and wife, now will incur a heavy responsibility. Here I am such as you see me, and here I mean to stay, likewise such as you see me. That is, if what you may call destiny permits. For destiny is a rum thing, Governor. I came here thinking it was the last police in the world I should ever set eyes on you in, and blowing me if you ain't a most the first person I pops on. I do not choose to be a party to this mummery of asking your leave to take the word out of your mouth, Governor. I may be a party to nothing respecting my past conduct. You may out with it, or you may keep it to yourself. All I say is that if you out with some of it, I will out with the rest, all or none. You are free to tell me, Inspector, here what I am a bad in." His penetrating mind have discovered that already. But if you go into names and particulars, you will not only be acting against the wishes of my missus, but you will lead to my telling the whole story right out for everyone here and then going away where no one won't never find me. I think the less said the better, said Mrs. Jansinus, uneasily observant of the curiosity and surprise his dialogue was causing. But understand this, Mr. Smilash, dear lady, Jeff Smilash, Mr. Smilash, whatever arrangement you may have made with your wife, it has nothing to do with me. You have behaved infamously, and I desire to have a little as possible to say to you in future. I desire to have nothing to say to you, nothing, said Mr. Jansinus. I look on your conduct as an insult to me personally. You may live in any fashion you please and where you please. All England is open to you except one place, my house. Come, Ruth. He offered his arm to his wife. She took it and they turned away, looking about for Agatha, who, disgusted at the gasping curiosity of the rest, had pointedly withdrawn beyond earshot of the conversation. Miss Wilson looked from Smilash, who had watched Mr. Jansinus' explosion of wrath with friendly interest, as if it concerned him as a curious inspector only. To her two visitors as they retreated. Pray, do you consider this man's statement satisfactory? She said to them. I do not. I am far too common a man to be able to make any statement that could satisfy a mind cultivated as yours has been, said Smilash. But I would amply point out to you that there is a boy yonder with a telegram trying to shove himself through the Iron throng. Miss Wilson, cried the boy shrilly. She took the telegram, read it, and frowned. We have had all our trouble for nothing, ladies and gentlemen, she said with suppressed vexation. Mrs. Trefusis says here that she has gone back to London. She has not considered it necessary to add any explanation. There was a general murmur of disappointment. Don't lose heart, ladies, said Smilash. She may be drowned or murdered for all we know. Anyone may send a telegraph in a false name. Perhaps it is a plant. Let us hope for your sake that some little accident on the railway, for instance, may happen yet. Miss Wilson turned upon him, glad to find someone with whom she might justly be angry. You had better go about your business, she said, and don't let me see you here again. This is odd, said Smilash plaintively. My intentions was nothing but good, but I know what it is. It is that young vermint saying that the young lady kissed me. Inspector, said Miss Wilson, will you oblige me by seeing that he leaves the college as soon as possible? Where is my wages? He retorted reproachfully. Where in my full wages? I am surprised at a lady like you, chock full of moral science and political economy, wanting to put a poor man off. Where is your wages fund? Where is your remuneratory capital? Don't you give him anything, ma'am? Said the inspector. The money he's had from the lady will pay him very well. Move on here, or we will precious soon hurry you. Very well, grumbled Smilash. I bargained for 9 pence, and what with the roller, and opening the soda water, and the shoving them heavy table about, there was a decomposition of tissue in me to the tune of 2 shillings. But all I ask is the 9 pence, and let the lady keep the 1 and 3 pence as the reward of abstinence, exploitation of labor at the rate of 125%. That is come. Give us 9 pence, and I will go straight off. Here is a shilling, said Miss Wilson. Now go. 3 pence change, cried Smilash. Honesty have ever been. You may keep the change. You have a noble art, lady, but you are flying in the face of the law of supply and demand. If you keep paying at this rate, there will be a rush of laborers to the college, and competition will soon bring you down from a shilling to 6 pence, let alone 9 pence. That is the way wages go down and death rates goes up. Worse luck for the likes of us. Ask us to sell ourselves, give pigs in the market. He was about to continue when the policeman took him by the arm, turned him toward the gate, and pointed expressively in that direction. Smilash looked vacantly at him for a moment, then with a wink at Fairholme, he walked gravely away amid general staring and silence.